It started as just another hilarious night on The Tonight Show until Ryan Reynolds heard something that made him stop mid-joke and changed everything forever. Studio 6B was electric with that familiar energy that came with certain guests. Tonight, Ryan Reynolds was back to promote his latest action comedy, and the anticipation was palpable. Everyone knew that when Ryan sat down with Jimmy, the conversation would be unpredictable, witty, and filled with self-deprecating humor. The iconic New York City skyline glittered through the studio's massive windows, creating the perfect backdrop for what everyone expected would be another laugh-filled conversation with Ryan's signature humor and Jimmy's infectious energy. The audience buzzed with excitement, and the Roots added their familiar warmth that made The Tonight Show feel like a late-night living room where anything could happen. What nobody noticed during the pre-show excitement was the boy in row 5, seat 8. Marcus Thompson, 9 years old, sat perfectly still in his navy blue blazer, his small hands folded carefully in his lap. To his right sat his mother, Sarah, who kept glancing at her son with a mixture of pride and nervous anticipation. Marcus had won his tickets through a local children's theater contest. His essay about pursuing acting despite his stutter had been beautiful and heartbreaking in its honesty. The challenge that made every audition a nightmare. Marcus stuttered when nervous. Casting directors would grow impatient, other child actors would snicker, and directors would suggest he consider behind-the-camera work instead. "Maybe acting isn't right for you, sweetheart," one casting director had said last week. "Have you considered other creative outlets?" Marcus had been acting in school plays since kindergarten. When he wasn't stuttering, his performances were magnetic, but the stutter had become an insurmountable obstacle in auditions. Tonight was supposed to restore his confidence after his latest rejection. Instead, Marcus sat quietly, wondering if this would be one of his last connections to the performance world he loved. The show opened flawlessly. Jimmy's monologue was sharp and current, earning genuine belly laughs from the audience. When he introduced Ryan Reynolds, the applause was thunderous, filled with the kind of enthusiasm that came from people genuinely excited to see someone they admired. Ryan walked onto the stage with characteristic confidence, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. "Ryan Reynolds. Everybody," Jimmy said. "Thank you for being here. Every time you're on the show, I forget what we're supposed to be talking about because I'm laughing so hard." Ryan settled into the guest chair. "Well, Jimmy, that's probably for the best. I'm basically just a pretty face with timing." The audience laughed. "Your new film is incredible," Jimmy continued. "How do you balance action, humor, and—" Ryan's expression shifted slightly more genuine. "The key is remembering that even in the most ridiculous action sequences, it's all about character, finding truth in every moment, even when you're hanging from a helicopter." As Ryan spoke, his eyes scanned the audience, a habit from years of performing. That's when he heard it, someone trying to speak, but struggling with the words. His eyes found Marcus, in row 5, leaning over to whisper to his mother, clearly frustrated. Ryan's rhythm faltered. Something about the boy's struggles spoke to him from his own childhood battles with confidence and self-doubt. "Actually, Jimmy," Ryan said, his voice shifting to a different register, "speaking of finding truth in moments, I'm noticing something in the audience that's reminding me of something important about performance." Jimmy looked curious, sensing that Ryan was about to take the conversation somewhere unplanned. In all his years of hosting, he'd learned to trust these moments when guests followed their instincts. Ryan stood up and walked toward the edge of the stage, his eyes finding Marcus again. "The young man in row 5, in the navy blazer. I can see you're really engaged with what we're talking about. Are you interested in acting?" Marcus looked around frantically, pointing to himself with a shocked expression. The audience turned to look at him, and he felt his face flush with a mixture of excitement and terror. Of all the nights, Of all the questions, Ryan Reynolds, his favorite actor, was talking directly to him. Yes, you, Ryan said gently, his voice carrying that distinctive warmth that made millions of people feel like he was talking directly to them. I can tell you're really listening. What's your name? Marcus slowly stood up, his legs feeling unsteady. He looked at his mother, who gave him an encouraging nod, then back at Ryan. When he tried to speak, the words got stuck. Marcus, he finally managed, his voice barely audible, but carrying clearly in the sunny quiet studio. The moment the stutter emerged, Marcus's face crumpled with embarrassment. This was his worst nightmare, struggling to speak in front of hundreds of people, including his hero on live television. But Ryan's expression didn't change. If anything, his smile became more genuine, more understanding. Marcus, that's a strong name, Ryan said, his voice carrying clearly across the studio. And you're here because you love acting? Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice in that moment. Marcus, can I tell you something? Ryan continued. Some of the best actors I know have had to overcome challenges with their speech. It doesn't make you less of a performer. Sometimes it makes you more of one. The studio fell completely silent. Even the Roots stopped their gentle background music. Jimmy felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't an interview anymore. This was about to become something much more important. Ryan made a decision that would define this moment forever. Marcus, would you mind if I came up there and talked with you for a minute? I have a feeling you have something important to share. Jimmy immediately understood what was happening. Ryan, go, he said without hesitation. We'll wait. Ryan Reynolds, one of the highest paid actors in Hollywood, left the stage and walked into the audience. The cameras followed him, but everyone in the studio somehow understood that this wasn't about creating good television. This was about something more sacred. Ryan reached Marcus's row, and the people around them shifted to make space. He sat down in the empty seat next to Marcus, and for a moment, a superstar actor and a struggling young performer sat together in the middle of a talk show audience, connected by an understanding of what it meant to fight for the right to be heard. Tell me about acting, Marcus, Ryan said simply. What do you love about it? Marcus's composure broke completely. I love being different characters, he said through his frustration. But when I get nervous, I can't talk right, and everyone says maybe I should just do something else. Ryan reached over and gently placed his hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus, can I tell you a secret? When I was your age, I was terrified of performing, not because I stuttered, but because I was convinced everyone could see that I was just pretending to be confident. Marcus looked up at Ryan with wide eyes, surprised that someone so successful could understand feeling scared. You know what I learned, Ryan continued. The things that make us different, the things that make us struggle, those aren't bugs in our system. They're features. They make our performances more real, more interesting, more human. Behind the scenes, Jimmy made a decision that would define this moment forever. He walked down from the stage and joined Ryan and Marcus in the audience, abandoning every protocol of television production. Marcus, Jimmy said gently, kneeling in the aisle beside their row. Can I ask you something? When you're performing, when you're being a character, does the stuttering happen as much? Marcus looked thoughtful, considering the question seriously. Not really, he said, his voice growing slightly stronger. When I'm being someone else, the words come easier. Ryan's eyes lit up with understanding. That's because when you're acting, you're not worried about being perfect. You're focused on being truthful. That's the secret, Marcus. Acting isn't about perfect speech. It's about perfect truth. The studio was completely quiet now, everyone hanging on every word of this conversation between a Hollywood star and a 9-year-old boy who was learning that his differences might actually be his strengths. Marcus, Ryan said, would you be willing to do something with me? Would you be willing to show everyone here what real acting looks like? Marcus looked terrified. But what if I mess up? Then you'll be just like every other actor who's ever lived, Ryan said, with a gentle smile. Messing up is part of the job. The beautiful part is what happens when you keep going anyway. Ryan stood up and addressed the entire studio. Everyone, I want to tell you about Marcus Thompson. He's 9 years old, he loves acting, and he's been told by people who should know better that his stutter means he can't be a performer. The audience was completely quiet, sensing they were witnessing something important. But here's what those people don't understand, Ryan continued. Some of the most compelling performances in history have come from actors who had to overcome speech challenges. James Earl Jones, who voiced Darth Vader, overcame a severe stutter. Emily Blunt, one of the most successful actresses working today, still works with speech coaches. The challenge doesn't disqualify you, it qualifies you. Ryan turned back to Marcus. Marcus, I want us to do a scene together. Nothing complicated, just two people having a conversation. And if you stutter, that's just part of your character. Marcus nodded, still nervous but growing braver by the moment. Okay, Ryan said. Here's the scene. I'm a spaceship captain, and you're my second in command. We've just discovered a new planet, and we're deciding whether it's safe to land. You can say whatever feels right for your character. Ryan immediately shifted into character, his posture changing, his voice taking on the authority of a starship captain. Commander Marcus, what's your assessment of the planet's surface? Something magical happened. When Marcus responded, he wasn't thinking about his stutter anymore. He was thinking about being a space commander. Sea captain, the readings show it might be dangerous, but I think we should be brave and explore. The slight stutter was still there, but it didn't matter. Marcus was completely in character, his voice strong and confident, his body language transformed. Excellent advice, Commander, Ryan said, staying in character. Your courage makes you exactly the kind of officer I want on my crew. Marcus beamed, standing a little taller. But Ryan wasn't finished. He broke character and addressed the studio again. Did everyone see what just happened? Marcus just gave a perfect performance. He was truthful, he was brave, he was completely committed to his character. The stutter didn't hurt his performance. It made it more real. The audience erupted in applause, but it wasn't polite applause or sympathy applause. It was recognition applause, acknowledgement of something genuine and powerful they had just witnessed. Jimmy was openly crying now, as were many audience members. But these weren't sad tears. They were tears of recognition, of hope, of the profound beauty of someone discovering their own strength. Marcus, Jimmy said, his voice thick with emotion, how did that feel? Like being myself, but braver, Marcus said, his voice clear and strong. Ryan knelt down to Marcus's eye level. Marcus, I want to give you something, but first I need you to understand something. You don't need to be fixed. You don't need to change. You just need to remember that your voice exactly as it is worth hearing. Ryan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver medallion, something he always carried for luck. This is from my first movie set, Ryan said. I've carried it through every film I've made since. It's my reminder that every performance is an act of courage. Ryan gently placed the medallion in Marcus's hand. I want you to have it, Marcus. Not because I feel sorry for you, but because I think you understand something about courage that most adults haven't figured out yet. But Ryan had one more surprise. He turned to Jimmy. What if Marcus helped us finish this interview? What if he asked me questions about acting? Jimmy's eyes lit up. Marcus, would you like to interview Ryan Reynolds? Marcus looked amazed. Really? Really, Ryan said, because I think you probably have better questions than most professional interviewers. What happened next? was pure magic. Marcus Thompson, a 9-year-old boy who had been told his stutter disqualified him from acting, spent the next 10 minutes interviewing one of Hollywood's biggest stars about the craft they both loved. His questions were thoughtful, genuine, and delivered with increasing confidence. When he did stutter, Ryan would wait patient, never rushing him, treating every word as valuable. "What's the scariest part about acting?" Marcus asked. "The scariest part," Ryan said, thoughtfully, "is caring so much about something that you're willing to risk failing at it." "But you know what, Marcus? You've already done the scariest part. You cared enough to keep trying, even when people told you to quit." When the interview segment ended, the audience gave Marcus a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. But more importantly, Marcus stood there understanding something fundamental about himself. His differences weren't obstacles to overcome. They were strengths to embrace. The show ended differently that night. Instead of the usual quick goodbye and credits, Jimmy made an announcement that would change how The Tonight Show approached stories about overcoming challenges. "Tonight, we learned something important from Marcus Thompson," Jimmy said, his voice full of emotion. "We learned that there's no such thing as a perfect performer. There are only truthful ones. And Marcus just showed us what truth looks like." Ryan added his own message, still sitting with Marcus. "And we learned that the entertainment industry needs to stop looking for people who fit a mold and start celebrating people who break them. Marcus doesn't need to change. We need to change how we listen." Marcus Thompson returned home to Ohio with unshakable belief in his own voice. 3 weeks later, he booked his first commercial. 6 months later, he was cast in a children's show, playing a character written to showcase actors with speech differences. Ryan established a scholarship fund for young actors with speech challenges. The episode became one of the most viewed segments in the show's history. Acting schools reported increased enrollment from students with speech differences. Marcus started a YouTube channel called Stutter Stories and became a mentor to other children being told to change their voices. The silver medallion became a symbol that our challenges don't disqualify us from our dreams. They qualify us for better, more human ones. It wasn't just late-night television that night. It was a masterclass in authentic performance, a reminder that different voices make entertainment more interesting, and proof that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to let other people's limited expectations define your possibilities. Your voice doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be authentically yours. And in Studio 6B, Marcus Thompson learned that the voice he'd been told was wrong was exactly the voice the world had been waiting to hear.